Hello, everyone. I'd like to call our special joint City Council, Planning Commission, and Architectural Review Board meeting to order. May I have roll call, please, Brian?
So for City Council members, Councilmember Clark.
Here.
Councilmember Mayer.
Here.
Councilmember Nomura.
Here.
Vice Mayor Solorzano.
Here.
And Mayor Alarcon.
Here.
On the Planning Commission, Commissioner Benefield.
Here.
Commissioner Moyer.
Here.
Commissioner Van Antwerp.
Here.
Vice Chair Allen.
Here.
Chair LaFevers.
Here.
And from the Architectural Review Board, Member Johnson.
Here.
Member Little.
Here.
And Member Wolf is absent. Vice Chair O'Connor.
Here.
And Chair Blakemore.
Here. Excellent. Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. I would now like to open up public comment. Public comment will only be heard concerning the agendized item below. So let's move on to the first item and only item, which is the update on new state housing laws taking effect in 2025.
Good evening, Mayor, Mayor and City Council, Planning Commission, and Architectural Board of Review. My name is Mac Carlson. I'm an attorney with
Recording in progress.
Okay, starting over. Good morning, good evening. Third time's the charm. Good evening, Mayor Alarcon, City Council members, Planning Commissioners, and Architectural Board of Review members. My name is Matt Carlson. I'm an attorney with the City Attorney's Office. I'm here with my colleague, Cody Sargent, and we're here to provide a high-level presentation of some of the key housing bills that were passed this last year. As an initial matter, I want to advise decision makers and the public that may be watching this meeting and that we won't be discussing any specific projects during this meeting. We'll just be providing a high-level overview of changes to the law. As we go through the presentation, we're going to pause between kind of key bills and sections for questions and discussion. And we ask that, given the complexity of some of these laws, that you give us a little bit of time maybe to respond and research if you have a really difficult question for us. And we definitely appreciate your patience as we sort out those answers. I will also ask community development staff to chime in to provide some local context from time to time. So our presentation is going to generally follow the materials in the staff report. We've sort of tried to categorize three general themes for the housing laws before that the state passed this year. And the first being incentivizing and facilitating housing production. The second being restricting implementation of impact fees. And then the third being enhancing enforcement of California housing laws. And these are just general descriptions. They're not specific in any way. The first three bills we're going to talk about here today, and I'll let Cody get started on the first one, are bills that amend existing laws that have that's established specific state-mandated development pathways.
And Mac, I'm sorry, I'm going to interject really quick. Can we clear this screen right here? There's a Zoom.
I was trying to get, Brian got it.
Okay.
Thank you, just that everyone can see all of the screens available.
Thanks, Brian.
The first bill that we're going to talk about is SB 1123, relates to subdivisions and ministerial review. So like Mac mentioned, the first three bills we're covering all amend existing laws and establish specific state-mandated approval pathways. So SB 1123 is an amendment to the Starter Home Revitalization Act of 2021, which was AB 803. It requires, the existing law requires a local agency to ministerially review subdivisions of up to 10 parcels. So ministerially, no discretionary review, no hearings required, of up to 10 parcels, and applies only to housing projects on multifamily zoned lots. So a project qualified under this act, if it's a housing development project, it'll contain 10 or fewer residential units. And existing law also contains numerous site-specific requirements. So for example, the site's not larger than 5 acres and substantially surrounded by qualified urban uses. The law also clarifies that the city may still apply objective standards. However, they cannot do so when the standards apply only to this specific project on the basis that it's qualifying for this streamlining. So it can be generally applicable development standards, but not targeted at the project because it takes advantage of existing streamlining. So SB 1123 modifies this existing law, and on July 1st, 2025, it'll apply to vacant lots zoned for single-family residences that are 1.5 acres or smaller and substantially surrounded by qualified urban uses. Qualified urban uses is a defined term in the bill, means any residential, commercial, public institutional, transit, or transportation passenger facility, retail, or any combination of those uses. The resulting parcels in the single-family zone must be larger than 1,200 square feet, and it establishes a minimum density for sites if the parcel is not included in the city's site inventory in the housing element. And finally, it does not contain a Coastal Act savings clause. As many of you know, implementation of these housing laws is made even more complex by the fact that the city is wholly located within the coastal zone. And so implementation of these bills is required to be consistent with the Coastal Act. Some bills that we'll cover today contain so-called Coastal Act savings clauses, which provide that the bill won't supersede or lessen the impact of the Coastal Act. Other bills, however, such as 1123, don't contain such a provision, and so there's no direction from the legislature on how to harmonize the bill with the Coastal Act.
Any questions on this bill before we move on to the next?
Yes. Go ahead.
Yes, thank you. Just a quick question. The SB 1123 calls out a minimum density. Is there a maximum density provision?
So the maximum number of units you can subdivide, right? So you're constrained by the 1.5 acres or smaller. And then there's certain lot size parameters. That means that the resulting parcels in a single family zone can be no larger, or must be larger than 1,200 square feet. And again, it's a 10-unit subdivision. So, there are going to be different ways to calculate the maximum density there, but it's smaller scale projects. It's not, a 10-unit per acre across a 10-unit or 10-acre site, for example. I don't know, Nick, do you have any thoughts on quick math there?
I don't have any thoughts on quick math, but I would just say that given how few vacant single-family lots we have in the city, I don't think that we're going to see, too many instances of this particular Senate bill being invoked here.
All right, with that, we will transition to Senate Bill 450. Senate Bill 450 amends existing law, SB 9. You may recall SB 9 was the bill back in 2021 that required ministerial approval for small lot subdivisions and 2-unit housing projects. This was often referred to as the duplex bill that effectively allowed for duplexes in single-family zones. There are limitations on where, site criteria and limitations on when these projects can be proposed, including restrictions on whether they're allowed in floodways or high fire areas or on prime farmland. And then SB 9 also included some development standards that govern things like parking, unit size, et cetera. This bill, SB 450, specifically specifies that agencies cannot impose objective design standards to SB 9 projects that don't uniformly apply in the underlying zone. It also establishes a 60-day timeline for agencies to approve or deny SB 9 projects. and requires that agencies provide a full list of deficiencies if the application is denied. It also clarified certain language related to a specific adverse impact that is no longer available to deny an SB 9 project. Under the prior version of the law, an agency couldn't deny a project for having its impact on the physical environment, and that's no longer available. Further, SB 450 amended SB 9's legislative findings to make sure that it applied to charter cities. You may recall that there was litigation and some public comments in the last year about the litigation and the success charter cities had against suing the legislator over the application of SB 9 and charter cities. The amendments to the findings, I think, are the legislator's attempt to unwind that trial court decision. We also would like to note that SB 9 does contain a coastal savings clause, like Cody mentioned. However, we want to highlight that the Coastal Commission has issued guidance that agencies within the coastal zone should amend their local coastal programs to permit development under SB 9. In accordance with this recommendation, Program 8 of the city's housing element commits the city to amend its zone code and local coastal program to implement SB 9 during this housing element cycle. I'll ask any questions or comments before we move on.
So I noticed that this is one of the bills that addresses the charter city issue. Is that something that we're seeing in some other housing bills? Because I know, as you mentioned, we've had presentations on some folks who are recommending the city look into becoming a charter city, and it seems like that maybe is not necessarily a road that is going to lead in a different direction. It looks like it's kind of circling back if the legislature is closing some of those loopholes.
Yes, so the legislator is often, if they want a law to apply to a charter city, they'll make specific findings related to a matter being a matter of statewide concern. So that's prevalent in a lot of state housing laws. And then in the rare instances where a court has found that SB 9, for example, is not a matter, or in that court interpretation is not a matter of statewide concern, the legislator has gone back and tried to amend to clarify why they believe it is a statewide concern. So probably more litigation to come on that specific issue related to SB 9 and charter cities. But I think SB 450 shows the legislator is trying to engage in an iterative process here to make these laws widely applicable.
Thank you. And then just one other question. So you mentioned that Coastal Commission gave guidance regarding this bill. Is that something regarding implementation of this bill? Is that something that they're doing for, I saw that it was mentioned in some of the bills, but not necessarily all of them. Does Coastal Commission pick and choose which bills they give guidance on, or are they kind of trying to uniformly give guidance?
Through the chair, through the mayor, yes, the Coastal Commission picks and chooses a bit. They try to provide, I think, as much guidance as they're able to, but there are certain bills that they have provided guidance on and others they haven't. Off the top of my head, state ADU law, the Coastal Commission's provided guidance on implementation of state ADU law. Assembly Bill 2097 about parking requirements near transit. They provide some guidance there, but they're definitely not comprehensive in how to interpret all housing laws within the coastal zone.
Thank you.
Yes.
Apologies if this is like an obvious question. I feel like I'm jumping in halfway through the conversation. I'm trying to make sure I'm caught up. So for clarification, SB 9, the duplex law, it does say that you can build a duplex only if it's owner occupied, but that has not changed. That's still, SB 450 didn't update that, did it?
So I guess there's two different things you can do with an SB 9 project. You can subdivide your parcel, so take one parcel and turn it into two lots, or you can build a duplex on your existing lot, or you can do both. So you could subdivide your lot and build two duplexes. With that in mind, there are limitations on the owner holding title if they're going to subdivide the property. And then there's also protections in the law that don't allow this type of development if there's an existing renter or unit on the site. So it's typically, because of those constraints, it has to be like a long-term vacancy for one of these units or owner occupied.
Okay, thanks.
The provision also speaks to demolition of more than 25% is allowed. Is there a maximum, or is this scraping the lots is now allowed?
Through the mayor, so yes, the prior version of the bill had a limit that you could do no more than 25%, demolish more than 25% of the existing structural walls unless the local ordinance allowed or the site had not been occupied by a tenant. The tenancy protections still apply, regardless of those changes. But the SB 450 has eliminated that cap, so you can do a larger scale demolition in order to rebuild and construct a duplex unit.
Thank you.
I have a question about the specific adverse impact, it says here, we can't deny the project based on the physical environment, and you list, but it could be if for public health or safety reasons. What are some examples of that?
Through the mayor, so the change here aligns SB 9 more closely with some of the other provisions of like density bonus law and the Housing Accountability Act that only allow a local agency to deny a project if they can provide that the project would have a specific adverse impact upon public health or safety, and there's no feasible method to mitigate that specific adverse impact. So typically, the identification would need to be based on some objective standards in the city's code related to safety primarily, or some sort of safety impact. I don't know of a specific, I guess in terms of some examples that may come to mind might be very high fire severity zones, floodways, liquefaction zones in some areas. Not saying that those apply within the city necessarily, but those are the types of safety findings that I would suspect.
Okay, thank you. Yes.
A clarification on that. On the public health and safety, I'm not aware, but I just did some incidental research about public health and safety and see some federal stuff that includes zoning under public health and safety.
Through the mayor,
Are you familiar with such a thing?
I'm not quite sure I understand. No, I don't. I'm not familiar with.
Well, they were saying zoning issues had to do with public health and safety, not necessarily a physical hazard, but I guess it's one of those touchy-feely things. But
through the mayor, I'm not sure what bearing the federal definitions for specific adverse impact on public health and safety have on the interpretation of state law. But
if there was such a thing in state law.
So what we're here to discuss tonight is provisions of state law with respect to implementation.
Yes,
yeah. We would welcome and evaluate guidance from federal agencies and from the legislator on how to interpret some of the language in state law at any time. So welcome that guidance.
All right, thank you.
One last thought, if I could. Is occupancy or limits on occupancy considered a safety element?
Through the mayor, board member O'Connor, I think they could be considered, if I'm understanding your question correctly, I think there could be a scenario where the number of occupants in a particular area might create a health and safety evacuation hazard if there's an objective written standard in place.
Great. So moving on, the last of the bills that amends existing streamlining options is AB 2243. This amends the existing law is Affordable Housing and High Road Jobs Act, also was known as AB 2011. AB 2011 allowed for a ministerial CEQA exempt approval process for 100% lower income affordable housing projects that are on commercially zoned lands or mixed income housing projects located along commercial corridors. It requires that construction workers earn prevailing wages and receive health benefits. And like a lot of these other bills, it includes quite a long list of location and site criteria to qualify for the streamlining process. A few examples: it only applies in zones that are principally permitted, or that principally permit office, retail, or parking uses, meaning they're by right uses. It's not located within 500 feet of a freeway. It's substantially surrounded by properties with urban uses, and it's not more than 20 acres. This bill amends AB 2011, specifically amends the site criteria to receive this existing streamlining to broaden it. First, it allows mixed income projects on sites that are a regional mall if the site is less than 100 acres. It also then allows for projects within 500 feet of a freeway, but requires those projects to include specific air quality requirements, for example, centralized heating, that there doesn't include balconies that face the freeway, certain air filtration media being replaced at the manufacturer's desired intervals. So kind of a long list of health standards that have to be in place if that project will be located within 500 feet of a freeway. And then it allows for projects on site where parking is a conditionally permitted use. So previously, right, AB 2011 only allowed for those uses if they were principally permitted. Here it broadens it for where the zone allows for parking as a conditionally permitted use. It also clarifies that the affordability requirements only apply to base units. What that means is those are units for the project prior to any density bonus increase. So the affordability requirements apply to those base units prior to any increase in density under state density bonus law. The bill requires that coastal development permits for projects located outside of the coastal appeals jurisdiction must be issued if the project is consistent with objective standards in the local coastal program. Specifically, the coastal appeals jurisdiction, as it defines it, is talking about areas between the sea and the first public road, areas without a certified local coastal program, which wouldn't apply here in the city, areas subject to 5 feet of sea level rise, and areas within 100 feet of a wetland or on prime ag land. Are there any questions or comments on AB 2243?
Yeah, hi. There's a statement about existing streamlining for residential development on commercially zoned properties. For Carpinteria, does that also apply to mixed use and to industrial zones?
Yeah, through the mayor, the way it defines commercially zoned lands is, again, back to that zones where, I'm finding the language here, where retail, office, or parking are principally permitted uses, and now where parking is permitted with a conditional use permit. So I don't know, and maybe Nick can chime in. I don't know offhand if whether those zones have those uses principally permitted or parking with a conditional use permit. But if they did, then those would qualify as commercially zoned for purposes of this bill.
Thanks, Cody. Yeah, so when AB 2011 first passed a couple of years ago, we did do kind of just a high-level, screening to understand what the applicability could be to the city, and we did conclude that it could conceivably apply to our CPD zone, our Commercial Plan Development Zone, as well as our MRP, Industrial Research Park Zone, because both of those zone districts do allow, for office or those types of commercial uses as a permitted, one of the primary permitted uses there. At the time, right, the 500-foot buffer from the freeway then took a lot of those properties out of play, and so its immediate impact at the time was pretty limited, frankly. Now with the change under AB 2243, that lifts that 500-foot buffer if certain air quality standards are met, it may bring some of these, commercial properties and office properties near the freeway back into play conceivably. But again, this bill is written in such a way that it kind of applies to a very narrow subset of housing type projects.
Yeah, I was also thinking about the properties down by the downtown T or just off the T down by the railroad tracks. Those
so
industrial
it-
zones.
It would not apply to those, I don't believe, because those do not allow office as a principally permitted use.
Question.
Let's change it.
So you're saying this is a 12, SB 1211? You could have an apartment house with 4 units, you could put 4 ADUs in the back or side or wherever. Does that say that?
Commissioner Benefield, you're jumping ahead a little bit.
Oh, I am?
Yeah. Can we?
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, we're talking through 2243, but that's a great primer if everybody's ready to jump into 2 ADU bills, accessory dwelling units.
Sorry.
I have a quick question and maybe I'm just having a hard time wrapping my mind around this. So it says how this bill clarifies that affordability requirements only apply to proposed base units. And so is what that sentence saying that cities would essentially, if someone were to take advantage of this, like have more affordable units or no? Is that the intention of?
Mac can maybe provide more, but my interpretation of it would be, it would depend on exactly how the project is proposed, but not necessarily the affordability restrictions would apply only to that lower number, that base units, and then any additional units that could be obtained through state density bonus law wouldn't be restricted by
Got it,
the
okay.
affordability. So,
Okay,
yeah.
thank you.
All right, I will move on to two bills relating to accessory dwelling units and junior accessory dwelling units. This first bill, SB 1077, requires the Coastal Commission to develop guidance for local agencies regarding permitting of ADUs and JADUs within the coastal zone. That guidance must be provided by July 1, 2026, and the Coastal Commission is required to hold at least one public workshop regarding that guidance. So, there were some questions earlier about when Coastal Commission provides guidance. They've previously provided guidance on how to implement state ADU law in the coastal zone, but there's now clear direction through this bill to provide another updated guidance regarding how to implement state law consistent with the Coastal Act for accessory dwelling units. Any questions before we move on?
Does that affect the people that are already in the process?
Through the mayor, so the guidance from the state right now is that local agencies are required to update their local coastal programs to implement state ADU law in a manner that tries to harmonize state ADU law with coastal resource protection policies. I imagine that the intention here with SB 1077 is to try to provide more uniform guidance to all local agencies on how they should do that, rather than specific guidance to each local agency as they come in through the local coastal program process to update their codes to allow for accessory dwelling units.
Can we be notified of this workshop, please?
Through the mayor, yes, I think both our office and community development staff will track this workshop and most likely, depending on the council's direction, participate. All right, now we will move on to Senate Bill 1211, which Commissioner Benefield previewed for us. This bill revises state accessory dwelling unit law to require that local agencies ministerially approve up to 8 detached units on an existing multifamily dwelling lot, except the number of detached accessory dwelling units may not exceed the number of existing dwelling units on the lot. The bill also clarifies that agencies cannot require replacement of uncovered parking spaces lost as part of an ADU construction. This basically extends the current law, which said that an agency couldn't require replacement of a garage or a carport, to uncovered parking spaces as well. And then, as suggested earlier, ADU law does contain a coastal act savings clause, and so the city must amend its ADU ordinance and local coastal program to implement before these provisions of state ADU law take effect within its jurisdiction. And that update process is ongoing. Any questions on Senate Bill 1211?
One question, Mac. So on the, with regards to objective development or design standards, it doesn't specify which ADUs those are now being removed from, but I know that at least in our current ordinance, you know, we apply design standards to ADUs. Does this mean we're no longer able to do that, or?
Through the mayor, that change is specific to ADUs that fall within this category that's often referred to as kind of state exempt ADUs. It's this subset of specific types of ADUs that are allowed under, there's 4 different categories under state law. The language suggests that a local agency cannot require design standards for those types of ADUs, but it could require objective or design review and design standards for the general type that the city lays out in its ordinance.
Okay, thank you.
And just to build on that, right, our existing ordinance has this distinction already. In our existing ordinance, we have a subcategory of ADUs that we refer to as special ADUs. That was the name that we had to use to avoid confusion with coastal commission. That exempt would suggest it's exempt from a coastal development permit. So instead of calling it an exempt ADU as state law does, we refer to these as special ADUs, and they're already exempted from these, having to apply with objective design standards. So this isn't for us a new category. It's just yet another ADU development scenario that would fit under this special category for us.
Great. Thanks.
All right, any other questions on this bill? Otherwise, we'll move on to our first bill in the next category on restricting implementation of impact fees. All right.
Great. So our first bill on restricting implementation of impact fees is AB 1820. This bill requires local agencies to provide informational fee estimates within 30 days of any request by an applicant. It also requires that the city post current fee schedules and an archive of fee studies, and provide a total sum of fees and exactions within 30 days of the final approval of the project. Just to note, this bill only applies to housing development projects. Additionally, based on discussions with staff, the city appears to already comply with the requirements of this bill. Are there any questions on AB 1820? Great. Then moving on, the next bill related to impact fees is AB 2430. This specifically discusses monitoring fees for density bonus projects. Historically, local agencies often charged a monitoring fee to ensure compliance with the affordability requirements of density bonus law. So a fee charged to basically oversee that continued compliance. And AB 2430 now prohibits applying that density bonus law monitoring fee for applying it to 100% lower income unit projects that are already subject to regulatory monitoring agreements. So for example, a development project may already be subject to a recorded regulatory agreement with the California Tax Credit Allocation Committee, or HCD, or the Housing Finance Agency. And if they do, then under AB 2430, they're not required to also charge a monitoring fee. The city is prohibited from also charging a monitoring fee for those projects. Are there any questions on AB 2430?
Do we have any projects where we've had monitoring fees?
Vice Mayor Solarsino, no, not to my knowledge.
And so basically, what this law would be doing, it's presuming that the whatever would be taken care of through the monitoring fee is already being taken care of through one of these other entities that you mentioned? Okay.
Through the mayor, yes, that's correct. And then in fact, it has additional requirements. The applicant provide those monitoring reports that they're already providing, also provided to the city.
Got it, thank you.
All right, I'll be covering two bills here, AB 2553 and AB 3117. We combine them because they're both related to mitigation of vehicular traffic impacts. So AB 2553 requires local governments to set lower traffic impact mitigation fees for transit-oriented housing developments that meet certain criteria. And I'll try to unpack that a little bit. Transit-oriented housing developments generally mean any housing development located within half a mile of a major transit stop. You're going to hear major transit stop a few times now, so in the remainder of this presentation. So a major transit stop means a rail or bus rapid transit station, a ferry terminal served by bus or rail, and the intersection of two or more major bus routes with a service interval of 20 minutes or less during peak commute times. That's 9 a.m. or for 7 a.m. to 9 a.m. and about 4 p.m. to 6 p.m. And so that's the first criteria for a transit-oriented housing development. Then the project also needs to be located within half a mile of convenience retail uses. That includes a grocery store. It's got to provide certain minimum parking spaces. And if all of these criteria are satisfied in the statute, then the cities must apply a lower traffic rate for the number of automobile trips when determining whether or how to establish or how much the mitigation fee is that applies to that specific project. AB 2553 also expands that definition of major transit stop that I mentioned earlier to adjust the service interval for the subpart of the definition that refers to bus routes. So previously, the bill only defined major transit stops as bus stops that had intersection of two or more routes with 15-minute service intervals, and now that's been extended to 20 minutes. Finally, AB 3117 prohibits a local agency from imposing a land dedication requirement to widen a roadway as a condition of mitigating vehicle traffic impacts for a project. So the local agency can still impose development or impact fees consistent with the statute, but we couldn't require dedication of a specific amount of land area to widen a highway for a project. Any questions?
I have a question. So just based on that definition of major transit stop, that does not apply to Carpinteria. We don't have a major transit stop in our city.
Oh, yeah.
Or do we? We do. Okay.
So, yes. So, Mayor, the only transit stop within the city is the Amtrak station.
Okay.
Based on our preliminary review of the existing bus routes and the timing intervals, there is no bus stop that serves as a major transit route at this time, just the Amtrak station.
Okay. Thank you.
So the last two bills on implementation of impact fees are AB 3012 and SB 937. AB 3012 requires the city to create a fee estimate tool by July 1st, 2032, the deadline set based on the city's population. It also requires that HCD, to help with this process, that HCD has to require a fee schedule template before July 1st, 2028, and that proposed housing development projects can, a template for proposed housing development projects that can be used by cities and counties, and a list of best practices regarding presenting that information for fees. SB 937 requires local agencies to defer payment of mitigation fees until a certificate of occupancy or final inspection for designated residential developments. To qualify for this deferral, the developer has to break ground within 5 years of building permit issuance to qualify, and various project restrictions must also be satisfied to qualify. But similar to some of these other impact fee bills, based on discussions with staff, it appears that this is already the practice of the city, and so we don't anticipate any new deferral procedures.
I have a question. Do we have then already a fee estimate tool that we use?
Through the mayor, vice mayor /Snow, we don't yet have a tool that's online. We do have an internal calculator that we use to provide those estimates that are called for under the previous assembly bills that we were talking about, AB, what was that, 2253. So we will need to roll out at some point a web-based calculator that the applicants or public could use. But we do comply with the other Senate bill there that Cody was talking about, which is SB 937, and the requirement to defer payment of mitigation fees until occupancy clearance on residential units. That's something that's already codified in our municipal code and that we already practice.
But would that require funding then to buy that type of program that you're talking about that would go on the website and be publicly facing, or is that not a separate software type?
I think it remains to be seen. I'm
Okay.
hoping that when the state provides their examples, that maybe they'll come up with something that's really simple, that's easy for us to kind of plug and play into our own website.
Got it. Thank you.
All right, we'll move on to AB 1893. I want to start with a quick summary of existing law because AB 1893 was a fairly large bill that amended the Housing Accountability Act to clarify language around the builder's remedy. So you may have heard this phrase of the builder's remedy both from throughout the last few years. There was an interpretation of the Housing Accountability Act that says the local agency cannot disapprove or render infeasible a housing project that conflicts with its general plan and zoning code if that project includes 20% lower income housing or 100% moderate income housing. AB 1893 was the legislator's attempt to put some further guardrails around the builder's remedy in exchange for lowering the affordability requirements to qualify. So, sorry, it's very difficult to read, so I will read out this table here, but the column on the left shows the version of the builder's remedy that existed prior to January 1 that required a developer to provide 20% lower income units. Those are units affordable to individuals making between 0 and 80% of the area median income, adjusted based on their household size, or 100% of the units in a project qualifying for the builder's remedy to moderate income households. And moderate income households are households that make have an income that reflects 80 to 120% of the area median income. Under AB 1893, the legislator established lower thresholds to qualify for the protections under the builder's remedy to 7% extremely low. So a project would either only need to provide either 7% of the units affordable to extremely low income households. Those are households making 15 to 30% of the area median income, 10% of the units for very low income households. That's 30 to 50% of the area median income, and 13% to low income households. Otherwise, it would need to provide 100% of the units for moderate income households, or be a project that is 10 or fewer total units on a site that's smaller than 1 acre and a minimum density of 10 units per acre. So these are the changes that developers get to benefit from if they want to qualify for the protections under the builder's remedy, i.e. that the local agency can't deny the project for inconsistency with the general plan, land use designation for the property, or the zoning code. In exchange, the bill sets forth various restrictions on builder's remedy projects. This includes by excluding certain sites that abut heavy industrial uses or require Title V permits. Those are air quality permits. It also includes new density maximums, and they're somewhat complicated calculation. Those density maximums are before the application of density bonus, but it's either a density that's approximately 30 units per acre for the city, 3 times the density allowed by the general plan or zoning ordinance, whichever is greater on the site, or a density that's consistent with the density specified in the housing element. So a project can be no larger than one of those 3 criteria. There's also additional density the applicant can obtain if they're within a certain distance of transit. And that includes a half mile of a major transit stop, or a very low vehicle travel area, or designated on certain tax credit maps. The bill also establishes certain density minimums for sites that are generally approximately 10 units per acre, so the project must be greater than 10 units per acre, or the lowest density in the jurisdiction, or the agency's minimum density for a project site. It also clarifies that a local agency may impose certain objective local standards, provided that they do not preclude the proposed density and their objective and set forth in the appropriate zoning district for the project. I would also add that so projects submitted before January 1, 2025 must meet all the, or sorry, before January 1, 2025 are allowed to rely on the older version of the builder's remedy for processing or use this newer version, but any project application that was submitted after January 1, 2025 would be subject to the provisions of the new builder's remedy in AB 1893. Any questions? Right.
SB 1037 also deals with enhancing enforcement of California housing laws. Specifically, this bill increases fines on local agencies, or allows the Attorney General to increase fines on local agencies that do any of the following. If they do not have a certified housing element. As a reminder, I think Mac may have already mentioned the Department of Housing and Community Development certified the city's housing element as in compliance with state law on January 30th, 2025. SB 1037 increases fines on local agencies that do not ministerially approve housing projects as required by state law, and increases fines on local agencies that act in a manner that is arbitrary, capricious, entirely lacking in evidentiary support, contrary to established public policy, unlawful, or procedurally unfair. This can generally be mitigated against this risk by developing robust findings supported by the record when making land use decisions. The city attorney's office did provide a presentation to the city in July on how to support these findings and or make robust findings supported by the record, and that presentation is available on the city's website. The civil penalties are now increased by up to $10,000 per month and a maximum of $50,000 per month, calculated from the date the violation began. And civil penalties would be deposited into the Building, Homes, and Jobs Trust Fund. Are there any questions on SB 1037?
All right, last but not least, AB 2904, zoning ordinances. This bill increases the notice requirement for an amendment to a zoning ordinance that affects the permitted use of a property from 10 days to 20 days before the Planning Commission hearing on the ordinance. So just increases the amount of time and notice requirements prior to the Planning Commission's consideration of changes to its ordinance. So just a modification to procedural requirement. Any questions?
Yeah, I don't think this is gonna sink in until we have an exact project. And then we're gonna miss some of the points here. It's gonna be tough for the city to make this work. You know, because they're gonna have like a contingency of lawyers telling us we can or can't do this. It's gonna be very hard, I think. Right?
Through the mayor, Commissioner Benefield, our office and planning staff, I think, is capable of reviewing project applications consistent with the state laws and providing guidance on how best to harmonize state housing law with the Coastal Act. That's not to say that we won't be back with more specifics about each of these bills should a project come forward with the city at the appropriate time. Again, I completely agree. It's difficult to review these laws in the abstract or try to provide a concise synthesis for you all, given some of the complexities here.
Thank you.
Just got a general question, really an observation that I think leads to a question. The fabric of Carpinteria has a lot of non-conformances with respect to density. Legal non-conformances certainly covered by conditional use permits and the like. My question is, as an example, if a property has a legal non-conformance with respect to density, are these provisions, subdivisions, ADUs, other, density provisions allowed to layer onto legal non-conformances with respect to density, or do you reset before you apply those?
Through the mayor, board member O'Connor, many of the bills explicitly reference that a nonconformity cannot be a basis to deny one of the applications for a permit. So, for example, accessory dwelling unit law expressly calls out that a nonconformance on the project site can't be a basis to deny a new application. There's also been recent changes to state ADU law to allow for delayed enforcement or retroactive permitting of existing units. That's just one example. For other laws and projects, the city would evaluate whether there's limitations imposed by state law on removing those nonconformances as part of the project.
I think I understand,
Oh, yeah.
but I'm not sure. It's I think it's going to your point, it's going to be case by case.
Is it?
Do we have any other questions?
I have a question.
Yes.
I have written down in my notes, 1893. So I understand that it changes the percentage of affordable housing, but it doesn't change its CEQA requirements, right?
Through the mayor, Councilmember Mayor, yes, there are no changes to the requirements in the Housing Accountability Act that a project still undergoes CEQA, and the Housing Accountability Act doesn't supersede the Coastal Act.
Okay, thank you.
Through that Coastal Act Savings Clause language.
Okay, thank you.
Right. Seeing no other questions, I'll go ahead and open up public comment. I don't have any slips. Do we have anyone on Zoom, Brian?
Mayor, we have no raised hands on Zoom.
Okay, thank you. Seeing none, I'll bring it back. And if there aren't any other comments or points of discussion, if I can have a motion, please.
So moved.
Second.
Okay, we have a first and a second. All those in favor? Aye. All right. We will now adjourn the meeting. Thank you.